If you haven't watched part 1 of the most overrated albums of all time, then watch it after this video. I'm going to be talking about even more albums that I find overrated, and just because I call an album overrated does not mean I find the artist overrated as well. In fact, most of the artists on this list I consider to be perfectly rated, and just because I find an album overrated doesn't mean I hate the album either. I enjoy every album in this video. I just don't find them as amazing as many people say they are. The Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Don't get me wrong, Pink Floyd is of course an incredible band and had a fantastic album run during the 70s. Wish You Were Here is near perfect, and Animals is one of my favorite albums of all time. However, I just don't find The Dark Side of the Moon as ambitious and mind-blowing as the other big albums they released at this point in their career. While it does have incredible highs like Time, Money, and my favorite song on the album, Us and Them, the shorter tracks on the record do not hold a candle to these highs and are pretty underwhelming. The instrumental progressions they go through are nowhere near as captivating as Time, for instance, and for the most part, these set of tracks are pretty one-dimensional. I don't find the guitars between Breathe and Brain Damage to be that distinct from one another. The album experience as a whole drops in quality right after Us and Them. In fact, I don't find the start of the album to be that amazing either. It's certainly not as mind-blowing as an album opener as Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Also, as much as I like Breathe and it is a highlight, it does sound by the numbers for a 70s era Pink Floyd song. Brain Damage, while also not a bad song, is another example of a by the numbers 70s Pink Floyd track. It's really the songs in the middle of the track list that are the true standout moments, but as for most of the other songs before and after them, I don't care for them as much. I also don't find the concept of the album to be their most forward-thinking or fascinating. I not only find the concept of Animals to have a better execution than what they did with The Dark Side of the Moon, but its themes, having animals represent different classes of a hierarchical society inspired by Animal Farm, are far more captivating from track to track, and the concept of Wish You Were Here just has a bigger emotional impact in my opinion. And then The Wall feels bigger, more forward-thinking, and has much more fascinating layers within its concept. But as a whole, while I still find The Dark Side of the Moon to be a great album, I think it's far from the band's best. 2014 Forest Hills Drive by J. Cole. Remember earlier when I said that just because I find an album overrated doesn't mean the artist who made the album is overrated too? That doesn't apply to J. Cole. He's overrated. He is not part of the big three, not even close, because to be part of the top 3 rappers of the 2010s, I feel like you kind of have to drop one of the best rap albums of that decade, and none of his albums are even close to deserving that title. 2014 Forest Hills Drive, often considered to be Cole's best, is an album that isn't as amazing as a lot of hip-hop fans make it out to be. For a rapper whose most praised attribute is lyricism, there are some pretty bad bars here. The biggest song here, No Role Models, while still an amazing song, I love the triumphant beat, and his Project Pat interpolation is passionate and iconic, does have its issues. The line Martin Luther King should have been in Dreamville comes off as really cringe and sort of insulting too. Like, imagine if Travis Scott said Rosa Parks would have been in Cactus Jack. He'd probably get clowned for it, but I guess J. Cole is fine because he's just too humble. There's also that Will Smith and Jada line which hasn't aged well at all. Also, Wet Dreams, rapping about how you lost your virginity in such a serious manner, even though it is still a pretty good song, is also a little goofy. Yeah, even on the highlights from this album, there are some flaws. Love Yours, one of the most beautiful songs here, has this message that there's no such thing as a life that's better than yours, which I don't necessarily agree with, even if the intention is meant to be uplifting and motivational. Another thing about the album is that he also overuses certain flows on the record, which is pretty tiresome, and the way this album ends as well, with it sort of trying to be like Kanye's Last Call in a way, being this lengthy half-song, half-spoken word track where he thanks everyone who has helped him reach this point of success, is just nowhere near as inspiring or full of personality as what Ye did when he did it. He's more so shouting people out than delivering an actual awe-inspiring speech. It's just a list of shout-outs without really any sense of telling an engaging story. It's cool cool when you're listening to the album for the first time, but you don't really want to listen to it again on subsequent listens, whereas with Last Call, I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. I'm not even sure if it's Cole's best album. I find For Your Eyes Only to have higher highs, but even that one is flawed as the execution of its concept is messy. Cole comes off as a rapper who tries to be a lyrical, influential, inspiring artist who wants to make tightly praised albums, and I guess he sort of does given the amount of love he gets from the mainstream, but he does deliver corny bars. The production behind his albums, while still not entirely bad, isn't game changing or entirely fresh and new enough for him to be considered part of the big three, and some of the messages he tries to spread do have their inconsistencies. If I wanted to listen to a laid back, chill jazz rap album with amazing soul chopped beats, introspective and awe-inspiring, well executed personal themes on topics such as growing up, looking at how far you've come and appreciating life, along with consistently incredible flows and hooks, I would much rather listen to Blue and Exile's Below the Heavens over 2014 Forest Hills Drive any day of the week. I mean, that album is over half a decade older than the J. Cole album and has aged way better. Whole Lotta Red by Playboi Carti. At the time this album came out, it received widespread hate even from Carti fans, and at that specific point in time, I would say it was overhated, but nowadays this album is overrated. I understand that it's influential and pioneers the rage genre, but at the end of the day, it is a 24 track album, it is very bloated, and it has a large handful of filler tracks on it. When Carti first broke into the scene, sparking waves within the 2017 SoundCloud rap scene with his hit Magnolia, and then later dropped his self-titled mixtape, he brought a new and fresh sound with unique baby vocals and addictive beats from Peerborn. Then when his debut album Dial It dropped in 2018, that was a massive step up from his already decent mixtape, having an atmosphere that was genuinely bittersweet and sort of dreamy for such a minimal trap album, one that despite how repetitive it is easy for me to get lost in and never get tired of. There are songs from that album to this day that I still consider some of the best trap songs of the 2010s, so given how much I loved Dial It, for Carti to follow it up with Whole Lotta Red was disappointing, and it still is. The vampire punk aesthetics that he was going for on this album were cool, and I loved that he was taking creative risks and experimenting. However, the execution of it all wasn't that great. The vocal melodies and flows he delivers throughout aren't as consistently infectious as the ones on Dial It. Control, for instance, while having an awesome beat going for it, gave me levels of disappointment when I first heard the chorus that I hadn't felt from a Carti song up until that point. Not only that, but I remember before the album's release, Carti posted a story of the song Kids Cudi featuring Kids Cudi, which made me really excited to finally hear an amazing leaked song actually being on an official album of his, but it's not. We get filler like Meh instead, a song that very much lives up to its title. There are some great songs on here. Stop Breathing is a banger. On That Time features one of the hardest and most vigorous beats he's ever rapped on, up there with R.I.P. And I even find Jump Out the House really fun, despite it being one of the most hated tracks on the record. However, the album experience as a whole lacks a massive amount of consistency in terms of enjoyment, as well as a decent album flow. With how short some of the runtimes on these tracks are, I feel they lost the potential to leave the big impact they could have achieved if they were longer. Listen, is Whole Lotta Red influential? Yes, but being a pioneer of a subgenre doesn't necessarily mean it's the best in its genre. The thing I can praise this album the most for is paving the way for more artists to make better rage albums after it, but Whole Lotta Red on its own is flawed. There will never be a day where I'll choose to listen to Whole Lotta Red over Dial It. Thriller by Michael Jackson. Listen, I love Michael Jackson's music and I still enjoy this album a lot, but people need to stop acting like this record has no skips on it. The hits on this album are near perfect. Thriller, Beat It and Billie Jean, very few 3-track runs are as flawless as that. However, when you go deeper into the track list and take a look at the deep cuts, most of them stick out like a sore thumb. When people talk about the best tracks on Thriller, I never see The Girl Is Mine with Paul McCartney, and it makes sense why. Their chemistry on this track is not good, and their their respective sounds don't really blend all that well together here. I find the super cheesy theme of the track where Paul and MJ are in this love triangle with this girl to be way too ridiculous to take seriously, and even melodically it isn't addicting. Really, the only part of the track that I can give it praise to is the instrumental groove, which I find to be laid back and quite nice, but it's not even the best groove on the album anyway. Every time I listen to this song, I just can't help myself but press the skip button so I can get to the title track. Baby Be Mine is one where I can really just take it or leave it. It feels like the most background song on the album. If someone were to play this song around me in the background, it's not bad enough for me to tell them to turn it off, but it's not good enough to make me pay attention and sing along to it either. I hate overusing words in my videos, but it is instrumentally by the numbers for Prime MJ, and that's the other thing with a lot of the deep cuts on this record. Instrumentally, they're not as uniquely amazing as the highs. There's not much about the groove to The Lady in My Life that fascinates me as much as the guitars on Beat It, the incredibly iconic synth line on Billie Jean, or the infectious bass line in the album opener. Thriller is still a great album, but it's one where the hits absolutely carry the track list and features deep cuts that leave a lot to be desired. I find Off the Wall to be a much better album. It's way more consistently enjoyable and actually has no skips on it, unlike Thriller, and even Bad doesn't have deep cuts as disappointing as the ones on Thriller. This album is generational, super iconic, the music videos were game changing, and if someone were to call the hits from this album some of the greatest pop songs of all time, I wouldn't argue with that. It's the best selling album of all time for a good reason. However, from front to back, it's inconsistent in terms of quality for me, and it's not even Michael's best. Thriller as an album experience feels like a greatest hits compilation, but with the artist adding random other singles that weren't hits for the sake of giving them a place on a full-length project to be recognized. You know, kind of like how Eminem put Fuck on Curtain Call. Like, subscribe, and click here to see part 1.